Morganelli could have escaped now if she wanted to, and run straight off to number one's fence, from behind which Jackie and Sis and Bert, under the protection of number one himself, were watching with intense interest the development of this exciting drama. But when her father calmly lighted a cigarette and began to talk to her without trying to pull her arms away from the tree, she felt at once reassured. "I know who you are, child," said Philip. "I knew when I saw your friends, for I know the children you go around with." There was no reply, but he caught a faint sound over his head which indicated that she unclasped her fingers. "If you'll come and sit down here for a minute and talk to me, I'll give you a penny." There was no reply to this either, but the surface of the poplar tree served so well as a whispering gallery that he could hear her talking in a low murmur to herself. This was an old psychological device of Morganelli's, and it was a way to exchange thoughts without the overt shock to one's shyness of officially addressing a stranger or being addressed. The stranger listened. Indeed, if he was wise, he listened in silence, and Nellie acted as chorus for both. "Jackie is just the same as Sis and Bert," she rambled on. "He dared me to do it, and said he'd follow me and come close when I was talking to Mr. Crow, but he ain't following me. He's talking to number one. But they're all looking to see if Mr. Crow takes me up and sends me to jail for running after he. If he did do that, I'd be glad. I'd be glad to go anywhere there isn't here, even if 'twere jail." Philip puffed on his cigarette, keeping a sharp eye upon the contractor and upon the surveyor, who were now engaged in an earnest colloquy, and an alert eye upon the three children and the old man. The only observer of his dialogue with his daughter, upon whom Phillips cast a relaxed, carefree, and devil-may-care eye, the eye of a tree begetter of bastards, was Betsy, number one's brown and white cow. Sorry, there's one of those stupid scooter gangs going by. Shitty world we live in with these stupid scooter gangs. So lame. But I'm not lame. I'm reading this great book to myself. Anyway, Betsy, number one's brown and white cow, whose neck was stretched beyond all decency and restraint between the rails of her master's fence so as to crop the less familiar grass on Philip's field. Perhaps, I say perhaps, I may pay for a little girl I know, going to the seaside or to some very nice place. This was a bribe beyond the power of resisting Philip's daughter. She slipped round the tree and stood in front of him, her hands behind her back. "Mummy wouldn't let me take no money for nothing," she said emphatically, looking down upon her progenitor with knitted brows. "That is, Mommy wouldn't unless she were a little squiffy, but not too squiffy. When she's too squiffy, Mummy do cry for Dad." "Was your dad's name Morgan?" inquired Philip, with intent to discover how much the child knew. Morganelli nodded vigorously. "But you," she added, "be my godfather, and a wicked miser one. It'll never do me no good if I wait till Judgment Day." This revelation of the manner in which his name was passed about between mother and daughter was very significant to Philip. "I mustn't set fire to the grass, must I?" he remarked amiably, extinguishing his cigarette by pressing it into the side of a molehill. He hitched himself up after this, and fearing dampness in the grass, thrust his cap beneath him. "Your hair hain't very grey," exclaimed Morganelli. Philip smiled and instinctively smoothed his hair down with both his hands under this feminine scrutiny. "Who said it was?" he inquired casually. "Red said you were a grey-haired buger," said the child. "What be a buger, mister?" Red? Oh, you mean that chap Robinson that I dismissed for cheek. If he a friend of your mother's? He paints now, responded Nellie confidently. Mummy do loathe the sight of his ugly mug. I'm glad to hear that, said Philip grimly. Your mother and I are in agreement there, anyway. Number one said that they would funny men do walk about when 'tis dark and they hear girt field. You mean old Abel over there? Said Philip. What funny men is he talking about? Them as lived where they mounties be. Them as had King Arthur for their king. Your friend's shaky in his history, Nellie, said Philly, and he was conscious of an agreeable warmth under his ribs as he called his daughter by her name. Weren't King Arthur king in them days? She asked. Not till much later, Nellie, according to most accounts. Who were king in their times when folks lived on hurdles and water? Heavens, child, I don't know, groaned her father. A sharp pang at the moment shook some nerve within him. It would be nice to come home of an evening from the office and listen to this child's chatter. I wonder if Tilly would, he thought. But the little girl had become very pensive. She, too, found it extremely nice to have someone in addition to number one with whom she could talk on the subject that filled her mind. Jackie always wanted to be the hero of every conversation. What she liked was to enjoy prolonged speculation with someone clever enough to know when King Arthur lived, but too grown up to want to be King Arthur. "'Tis queer," she remarked, "to think of they old men, funny men, rowing in their boats where you be sitting now." But though Philip had no desire to be King Arthur, or to be any unknown Neolithic hero, he resembled Jackie in his inability to brood for more than a minute over the mystery of the passing of time. "Have you seen that boat in the museum, Nellie?" he inquired now, bringing the subject down to something concrete. "No, mister, I ain't seen him, and don't want to see him if Mr. Murray be there. He scolded me turrible once when was played in museum yard. He took Jackie's ball away and never gave it back. He kept Jackie's ball, he did, for his own self. 'Tweren't right, Abe. Jackie said he'd tell a policeman, but policeman be his friend. Policeman be all of us in thick yard talking to he." Philip was silent. His daughter's attitude to these local magnates was so different from his own that he felt at a loss for a suitable comment. "If you was one of the Lake Village men, mister, and I were asked talking to ye, would you have a girt stick with a sharp flint on him, and three self all naked like, or maybe a few big dock leaves round the waist?" Annoyed with himself for not being able to deal better with her rambling talk, which had now become so easy and natural, and was thus very agreeable to him, Philip actually felt his cheeks beginning to burn. "You'd be glad enough I had a spear with a flint top," he remarked, "if that cow over there was a saber-toothed tiger or a mammoth." The little girl's eyes shone. "Would he go after it now with that spear and rip its belly open for it?" she inquired with panting eagerness. Philip began to experience a definite fear that the child would soon want him to play a game with her and rush off across the field with his stick, pretending that the harmless Betsy were a mammoth. "Do you learn history at school, Nellie?" he inquired. "Would you spear him under his ugly tail, or would you spear him in his girt mouth?" said Nellie, disregarding his reference to school and to the study of history. Philip liked it when she called him you instead of Mr. He stared at the ground beyond his daughter's gray skirt. Yes, it was certainly a queer thing that this grass should have been covered with brackish expanse of water in those old days, but it was not a thing he cared to think about. some subtle ways it seemed to make his present activities less important. She certainly had a mind, this child, but it was more like her mother's than his. He remembered that it was just the sort of vague and to him rather desolate brooding the big-eyed char girl used to indulge in when he talked to her in Mrs. Legg's other house. "I'm going to make a new road into a street and a bridge over the Brew," he suddenly announced to her. He had not intended to say these words. He had not intended to refer to his present undertakings at all. It must have been a subconscious desire to boast of some great deed before his offspring, so as to make up to her for not going on with that story about mammoth speaking. "I don't like roads," said Morgan Nellie. "I like towpaths and cattle droves best. Jackie and me's going to play Indians in Wickwood when the leaves are all down." "What will the gamekeepers say?" said Philip, whose idea of woods was associated with the sporting activities of his friend Zoyland. "Oh, Jackie do know a gap into the woods. Sis can't get Bert through the thick gap, but I can. I lifts he and pushes he till he be over. Us get bluebells there, bunches of 'em, and Jackie found a muggie's nest with 5 eggs when us were there. Do you hold with talking more 2 eggs, mister?" "Sis says 'tisn't right to take 'em all. She did cry, Sis did, when Jackie took 'em, and I made him put 'em back, all but 2. Sis said the mother bird was wailing something pitiful, but Sis be soft over such things." "I'm going to make a bridge over there," repeated Philip. He seemed driven by an impulse he could not resist to try at all costs to impress the child's mind. "If you don't like roads, Nellie, you surely like bridges." "That's Pumperless's over there," she said in an awed whisper, "where King Arthur threw away his sword. I'm going to build a new bridge, another bridge, much bigger than Pumperless's." The child looked at him with a look of horror. She was evidently deeply shocked. "Not anywhere near Pumperless, are you?" she asked, while an expression of aversion and distaste came into her eyes. "But Nellie," he pleaded with her, as if she were a grown-up person, "my bridge will be even ever so much bigger and broader, and a great many lorries will pass over it. Pumperless is a shaky old erection. Probably it'll have to be taken down. Progress can't stop because people are sentimental about a heap of old stones. That's narrowness, Nellie. That's prejudice. That's being soft and silly, like you said your friend Sis was." But he had shocked the little girl through and through by what he had said, and no special pleading, no references to Sis, could undo the harm he had done. "Pumperless taken down? King Arthur's bridge taken down? I don't like you, mister. I hate you." Philip was astonished at the contortion of fury into which her face was convulsed. "Come, come," he said. "Don't let's quarrel the moment we've begun to make friends." He jumped up lightly to his feet and made as if he would lay his hands on her shoulders. "They won't let you pull Pumperless's bridge down," she cried, skipping back out of his reach. "Mr. Geard won't let you." "Mr. Geard couldn't stop me if I decided to do it," cried Philip, rapidly growing as angry as the child was. It was not a sign of Philip's littleness, but of his greatness, that he could get so vehement in a dispute with a little girl. Napoleon would have done so. So would Alexander the Great. So would Nelson. So would Achilles. Most modern rulers would have laughed at her and retorted with some quip too ironical for her to understand. He could, said the little girl, and putting out her tongue, she shook her small fist violently at him and scampered off a wild rush towards number one's cottage. Philip put on his cap very carefully and gravely, picked up his stick, and walked with leisurely steps towards the 2 men. I shall say I scolded her for her bad behavior, he thought. She got impatient like a spoiled child in a minute, and answered rudely and ran away. Thus would he explain to anyone who had seen their quarrel what it was that had happened. You've taken all the steps, I presume, sir? said the contractor to him a little later. About getting leave from the county and so on to have this new road and this new bridge made? Certainly, of course, replied Philip. I've been to the government offices in London about it, as well as to the county offices in Taunton. The only thing that would possibly delay it would be some of these small proprietors, like that old man over there, making difficulties and asking too much. From what you two gentlemen tell me, it would really be most advisable to purchase his permission. He raised his voice at this point so as to include the Evercreech surveyors in his audience. I was saying that I think it will be necessary to pay whatever compensation that old Mr. Twig demands. If we brought it through Lake Village Field, there might be some red tape difficulties with the National Office, and those things always delay matters, so. Well, that's Glastonbury for tonight. See you some other time. Perhaps. Cheers.